I watched the Tariq Nasheed interview with VladTV. So let's break down what he got right, what he got wrong. What I appreciate is that, yes, we who come from this slavery experience in this country, we are distinct. And I think we just need to stop this whole fight like there's something controversial and divisive about that. It is not considered divisive if someone comes to this country and says, I'm Jamaican. It is not considered divisive if someone comes to this country and says, I'm Ghanaian. It is not considered divisive in any other context. But when I say I have a history too, I have a lineage, you're dividing the black community. That is just fundamentally just unfair. It's inconsistent logically, and it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So just like you want me to respect you, please respect me. I think that's very basic. I can appreciate that. I can appreciate that he's saying we need to advocate for ourselves. I can appreciate that he is saying that this is lineage based. All right, this isn't about your feelings. These are just the facts. This is your lineage. Yes, got it. Agree. The large problem that I have with this, if you're going to have a movement that's based on lineage, you can't start with falsities about that lineage. And this is the thing that I keep saying, and I keep seeing it, and people keep telling me, nah, I got it all wrong. But it's just like, no, if you let people talk long enough, it comes out. Overwhelmingly online, when I meet FBA people, they are really into this whole indigenous thing. There is such an emphasis on being indigenous. And they'll dance around it, and it always comes back to the same. If they talk long enough, it comes back to the same thing. We're Indians. It somehow comes, like, I don't care. It may come up in minute number 2. It may come up in minute number 10. It keeps coming back to we some darn Indians. There's this whole thing, they have to be indigenous somehow, which to me makes no sense. If your claim is that you're owed reparations, but you're an indigenous American, then what are we talking about? But again, let's get back to the main point. You can't say this is based on lineage and lie about the lineage. Y'all, you're not Indians. You're not indigenous to this country. I'm sorry to break this to you. And you love to dance around the whole DNA thing. The reality is you're just not. And so in this interview, he makes it a point to say that, yeah, we came from Africa, but then we mixed with the population here. You didn't. That's just actually not true. No, we can't really determine a lot of things from 1500, right? So the first Africans come via the Spanish in 1526. We know that they mixed in with the indigenous population. Well, the reality is those people, they just went off with them. You don't descend from them. They went with them. But we ought to have DNA that would show that. And the reality is study after study after study. And they love to jump on the whole, well, you can't trust 23andMe. There are several studies. I will put some in the video commentary. There are several studies that dictate black folk usually are less than 1% indigenous. You are not indigenous. There's not this big melting pot between black folks and indigenous people. Do some people have that? Sure. But here's the problem. By and large, when I hear people talk about this, they say, oh, my great grandmother was full-blooded Cherokee or this or that or whatever. That's great. The problem with that argument, even if they're telling the truth, is you have hundreds and hundreds of people in your family line, and you picked out one. You skipped over 200 African folk and went to one Cherokee. You have more white people in your family line. How come you're not claiming them? I guarantee you have more white people in your bloodline than you have indigenous people. And somehow you're claiming indigenous based on this one great grandmother and skipping over 15 white guys. It makes no sense. It is inaccurate. And yet you're saying, let's have a movement based on lineage, or at least an identifier, but let's lie about the lineage. Bro, that doesn't work. It doesn't work. There is no great mixing between these two populations. So when you get way, way early in the colonial period, 1500s, 1600s, and even 1700s, if someone went to that side, I guarantee you they went with them. Because if you're just black running around, that's not going to go well for you. So if you're a runaway slave and you run away to an indigenous nation, you're just probably going to be there. So again, you don't come from that. And so they always double down on this whole indigenous thing, like, oh, we were all here. If you go closer to the equator anywhere, the people are going to have melanin. So yes, there's all types of people with melanin walking around. The question is, if you have a lineage-based movement or identifier, your lineage needs to go to those people. And that can't be substantiated. Okay? Let's just say in theory, let's say even Africans, let's say Africans came here before Columbus, set up shop. The reality is you still wouldn't descend from those people, because those people would have mixed in with the indigenous population, and we know what happened to them. By and large, they were wiped out or moved out. There's a reason why they started importing Africans to work the tobacco fields and the cotton fields, because they needed labor. If there was just an endless supply and the indigenous people worked so well, they would have just kept doing that. But they didn't work out as well. Many of them died off with disease, etc. So were there indigenous people enslaved? Absolutely. Millions. Right? But let's look at the geographical dispersion, the geographical spread of that. I'm messing up, right? So, for example, let's take New Mexico. New Mexico didn't even really have black slavery because they largely enslaved the indigenous population out there. But you, as a black person in this country, you didn't come from New Mexico. You came from South Carolina, from Florida, like all these ports along the East Coast. And so you didn't come from them. So if you're trying to hang on to one random indigenous person way up the line who may have been on a plantation, that's like a grain of sand in a bag of sand. You really look ridiculous. And that's why you have 0.02% indigenous blood because of that. It makes no sense. You have far more European than native, and yet you're saying I'm this. This is crazy town. It really is. And I think also, when you make super huge and outlandish claims like this, you got to be qualified. Tariq Nasheed is not a historian. There is no credible historian that would back up these ridiculous claims. Historians would love to discover that and write the paper that changes everything. And I mean black historians, white, everybody. If you do history, that would be a huge find to realize we got it wrong the whole time. And yet nobody says that because it's just not true. The evidence doesn't support that. It's something people just made up because black people still have an identity crisis, and it's been going on for a long time. So yes, your grandmother told you that you had Cherokee. What else was she going to tell you? We came here against our will and we were raped a bunch? That's way less pleasant. That's way less comfortable. So it reminds me of an episode of the Boondocks one time when they talk about the case of Catcher Freeman. If you ever watch the Boondocks, you see this episode where Granddad just glorifies and glamorizes this history that's not completely accurate. That is a long-standing trend in of black folks because we have been so uncomfortable with our actual history that we rather make up some stuff. And I understand that. Like, I get it. That's really hard to confront that my history has been this ugly. That's very hard. But those same people will tell you, man, I came from the hardest hood, you know what I'm saying? We had gunshots. So you're not bothered by a complicated history. You're not bothered by sordid history presently, but like the one from 1700 just bothers you so much you got to make up something else. You can't say this is based off lineage and then make up a lineage. Nothing of the historical record would validate that to be true. It's just not. So again, let's say that there are black people, even Africans, let's say, before Columbus. The question is, does your lineage connect to them? And there's zero evidence for that. Now, there was one point when I really got upset because they asked the brother, Vlad asked him about Plessy versus Ferguson. And he was like, oh, remind me what that is? And at that point, I'm just like, whoa, you do not have the credentials in history if you don't know Plessy versus Ferguson to make these kind of arguments. Now, to his credit, he did rebound, I guess, once his memory jogged and he started explaining the case. So I would, look, maybe it was a mental slip. I will give him that. But you understand the point. You need to have some real credentials in history and historical research before you start saying things that are just demonstrably false. And so, as much as I want to rock with a lot of the FBA people who say, oh, it's not about a movement, it's just about an identifier. Cool. I want to believe that. But over and over again, you all start to reveal your colors. This is not just about saying, I come from this slavery and chattel slavery experience. This is about something else. And if it's not, then let's come to the table and talk about it, and let's get rid of the BS. And let's get serious about who we are, what our actual history is, and what we do going forward from here. Because all this Indian stuff is not only patently false, but it's actually offensive. It's no different than a Holocaust denier. When you deny the transatlantic slave trade and you deny my people suffering, that offends me greatly. When you deny people like, again, you go from Tariq Nasheed and then you go a few steps further to the Dane Callaways, you deny people who are meaningful to me and say Nat Turner doesn't exist, when just because you don't know enough about primary research doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Because actual scholars are going to go to actual court cases, trials, and look up the records and figure out, oh no, this person existed. Here's the evidence. Actual scholars are going to look at newspapers around the time who report on this and say, oh, this person existed. Actual scholars are going to look at records, tax rolls, census records. There's a lot of work that people do to figure out who existed and what they did. And so in 2025, don't jump on a camera and say, oh, we just been lied to the whole time. I know something that all these scholars somehow miss. Actually, you don't.